Yeah, so in today's episode, we're going to talk about money, and to put that in context, kind of a revisiting of our framework, our foundational framework, which is the flywheel, and of self. If you picture a circle at the middle of the circle, maybe even the palm of your hand, if you point it to the middle of your hand, and then these five spokes around that, and in the middle is self. As we've said many times, Jim, self awareness, self doubt, self confidence, self assessment, self accountability. I think you created a list of 20 of those things, and they're really interesting phrases to talk about as we've done here before this podcast, and maybe we could do some of that on this podcast. But we did last three episodes were worldview, health, and profession, and now we're on money, and then the next one's going to roll it out with relationships. But today we're going to talk about money, and when we look at our wheel, and when you go and start that radiant thinking outward from the thought of self, ego, money, and then you either have a sense of scarcity about money or you have a sense of abundance about money. And there are certainly gradations, far left to that, far right of that, and everything in between. But yeah, when we were talking before the podcast, we had a couple of conversations. So the way we both have adult kids that are doing well, that are making money, and they've shared with us how they think about money. I have an ex-wife who worked and made good money the whole time I was making money, and your wife, your wife of your entire life, has made good money, and so we have some really interesting perspectives on money. And as I've told you a million times, I was a multimillionaire and then got divorced and lost everything. So I've gone. And I was raised by parents that were depression parents. So we grew up with, I remember saying to my mom, I need a new pair of jeans. And she said, well, you have two pairs already. What do you need another one for? That was just, turn the lights off when you walk out, close the door. We're not air conditioning the whole neighborhood. Everything was about saving money, even though my dad made good money. So, Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, couple thoughts. Like you said, just before we started recording, I shared a story with you about our our methodology, our system, our process, and it always starts with self, right? And that self, I'm up to 20 words. I think I'm gonna stop at 20, but it was having a beer with a real good friend of mine and asked him about. He listens to the podcast, and when we start off the conversation about self, he came up with. I said, "What are your selves?" And right away he said, um, "Self awareness." And then after that was self evaluation and so on and so on. But I think that's just a great one because self awareness speaks to what we're going to talk about today, and that's money. Self awareness that the money is a trigger. It triggers a lot of emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and as you said, so much of this comes from our childhood,
Mm-hmm.
and so much of this could destroy relationships. In fact, I know it's a fact, a statistical fact that the number one reason that most marriages end is due to financial. It's a financial reason. That's the
Yeah.
number one. I think sex is number two,
Yeah.
but it goes to show you how much that plays into everything that we do, and not being aware of it. I realized years ago um, how much that really was affecting my life, and it's funny because it's something I share regularly now. There's two types of people, the worst kinds of people in most cases, right? The one is that acts like they have money and they don't,
Mm-hmm.
but but over time, I think there's one other one worse, and that's one that acts like they don't have money and they do,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it's just as damaging, right? And how everything they do in life gets projected out, or how they respond to everything. But yeah,
That's interesting. I think that no, I had not thought of it in that term, but what was floating around in my head was, cliches are cliches for a reason. And one of the biggest ones around money is the root of all evil, you know?
huh, yeah,
And I think it to me, and to your point, the people that have money that pretend they don't, the people that don't have money that pretend they do. I also was thinking to myself, having had lots of material possessions my whole life, and then having had very few, I've never, my happiness has never vacillated based on how much money I had or didn't have. And if that's true, and it is for me, by fact, right?
Mhm.
Then money is not important, right? And if money is not important, then why do we get so emotional over it all? And it's,
Mhm.
the old adage that, you know that's just something rich people say. Money doesn't matter. That's just
Mhm.
something rich people say. But you grew up in a mixed hometown. I grew up in a kind of wealthy white hometown.
Mhm.
I've had friends that had no money, and I've had friends that have lots of money, and I've
Mhm.
never attached anybody's happiness to money. It's
Mhm.
always attached to what you began with, which is, are you self-aware, right?
Mhm.
Because if you're self-aware, you can make adjustments when life comes at you.
Mhm.
But if you're
Mhm.
looking to blame other people or other things like money, that guy's bad because he has a lot of money. If he's bad, it's not because he has a lot of money, right? He's
Yeah.
just bad because he's bad, you know?
Yeah. No,
So,
it's a couple things you said that I appreciate. And like I said, let's just use our own childhood, right? It's a big part of our system. And that is you go back and our worldview is based on our childhood. And that childhood is based on our hometown. And like you
mhm,
said, I appreciate your transparency about, yeah, you grew up in a let's say upper um I don't want to use the wrong words, right? But that was not very different, but quite a bit different than the world I grew up in, which was very middle class. My father was a government employee, and my mother was a nurse. Those are fixed incomes. Those are
mhm,
good wages, but not great,
mhm,
right? So we had a budget, and we didn't have house cleaners and gardeners, and we our vacations were very modest.
yep, yep,
We went camping. We didn't go take trips across the world. We'd have one hotel room with six of us total, and
mhm, mhm.
I remember sleeping underneath the car one time because there wasn't enough room in the tent. Right. That's okay, right? So you
Yeah,
grow
yeah.
up always being aware of money, and then but I did live in an interesting area. Like you said, I look back on, I'm very grateful for it, but it's very diverse in terms of different nationalities and groups. But we did live in this area where it was near the Hayward Hills. So
Mhm,
there was some people in our school that had money,
mhm,
not super wealthy, but I was exposed to families that had money that had a place in Tahoe that I went to, um, had took big vacations and things like that.
mhm, mhm,
And so early on, I did have this perspective that there was this other place. There was these other different vacations. There were different. They always had cars. They always had money in their pocket, and that was very different than a lot of myself and us. We just didn't have that. So
When we had another, there's always the other side of the tracks, no matter what town you live in, right? And so we
mhm,
had, even though Winchester, where I grew up in Massachusetts, was a wealthy white town and accurately described as such,
mhm,
um, there were kids that went to school with me in high school and junior high that didn't have money, and they lived in the town. They lived on the other side of the proverbial tracks.
mhm,
And so, but to me, it all goes back to my parents. This is like where you get your worldview from, as you said. Their attitude about money was perhaps a bit scarce, but it wasn't the enemy either. It wasn't like
mhm,
rich people were bad. No, bad people are bad and good people are good, and they can be poor or they can be rich. I
mhm.
don't ever have never correlated good or bad with money or less money. I don't know how you think. And then I also
Well,
think that
we do know that at a certain point, once you have your basic needs met, more money doesn't make you more happy. But
mhm,
it also is fair to say you have to have some money to get your basic needs met. And
mhm,
so, we don't want to go too far with that. Money, yes, money can make you happy. Yes,
yeah,
it can.
yeah.
It can make life a lot easier. So I'm not going to go as far
I
as
think
saying
this
money doesn't
this
make
is
you happy.
let me just throw something out at you there with
Hmm.
money making you happy. I
Hmm.
think money can bring you pleasure. I
Hmm.
don't think money cannot bring you joy.
Hmm.
Okay? Joy comes from within, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't think it makes you happy. I think it makes things convenient. I think it can bring you pleasure. But those are fleeting moments. It's like the old, people talk about getting a new car. Well, that new car smell's gone in a couple of weeks. It's not a new car anymore, right? So you can feed that beast forever and be miserable, you know. And then
Well,
there's also,
I can run with this for a second because I happen to have some very very close friends that have were born into families that have a lot of money. I'm talking, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So, and they become, I mean, really good friends,
mhm,
and it's really kind of sad in a way. And this is not uncommon, by the way, when you're born into a family, the dynamics you have with your siblings is horrible because
mhm,
especially when the person, the matriarch in most cases that created that money is gone, they fight over the money, and that's a terrible life
yeah,
to fight over your with your brothers and sisters of money that neither of you made,
yeah,
and that's happening. That's sad because but it also is that you never have the satisfaction of making money, and I think we underestimate the uh, the feeling or the accomplishment that you get when you're creating something of value and then being compensated for it. So,
no question, no question. And that's worth. That's the old self
it,
worth,
oh yeah,
right?
great, yeah, great call.
Yeah,
You're right.
and
So it's not just about having money; it's how you have accumulated money, how you manage your money, and then how has it been used against you. And this is another thing I've seen, especially at this stage in our life, Mark, because this stage in our life, let's just do the simple math. We're at a point where our parents are going to die or already have died, and they're going to leave some money, if they have any, to us.
mhm,
So this is a good example of acting like you don't have money when you do have money. It's not only is it bad behavior because it's not authentic at all, right? You make bad decisions. You're
mhm.
walking around like you only have 10 cents in your pocket and you're spending 15 cents to save 10, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cutting
It's
coupons and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I've catch myself doing this. I mean, I'll give you an example. Especially, I have a Tesla that I don't need gas, but if I'm driving my van, fuck, I'll drive around the block 5 times looking to save 17 cents because in my mind I default back to when I was 16 and a half years old or 17 years old, and that makes a big difference. That's an extra $10 or $15 when I go to fill up, especially on a van, right? That's $100. So
It's
I just can't turn that off, right?
no, you can't.
It'll
You
it'll,
can't.
it'll ruin my day.
Yeah, you
But
can't.
at the same time, it's kind of stupid in a way because what's my time worth, right?
Well,
And I may run out of gas doing it. I almost have a couple times.
it's funny that you bring that up because I just yesterday I was driving and I didn't go out of my way.
Yeah.
But what I do is I go the first gas station I pass by, I check the price. Then I keep going and I see, okay, same price, same price. Oh, that one's 8 cents a gallon less. Let's
Yeah.
pull in there, you know? So it's a similar thing. Like, dude, is that gonna have any impact on you financially ever?
That's my
None.
point. Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
Well, that's insight into how our minds can fuck with us with respect to money,
I
you know?
can, and not always for good, even if
No,
just
no,
to save a
no.
couple bucks. How about
And I
relationships? I mean that can ruin a relationship because one person, like in my case, my wife grew up with more money than I did, so and she can make money, so she just doesn't have the emotional attachment to things like I do.
mhm.
And it took me a while to realize that, hey, if I don't get more self-aware of this, and then it's gonna it probably had already affected the relationship, right? And
Yeah, yeah. Well, you can't. It's challenging in any relationship when you make assumptions about anything. But money has particular power in that regard. My ex was always a good money maker, but like I told you, so another time, her father lost all of the family money growing up, and he was talking millions, and so money was the loss of all the money was attached to her, and I couldn't empathize with that because as 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 modest as my parents were in the way they grew up, we had a good financial. We were in a wealthy town because my dad was an airline pilot and he made good money, relatively speaking, and but he always had a sense of appreciation for it, and he was always very responsible with it. She didn't come from that, so it's fascinating. And the other thing that keeps popping into my head is not only Winchester, but Notre Dame, where I went to college. There's a lot of rich people there, right?
Yeah.
And there's two types. To your point, one type made their father made his own money, and the other type was grandpa left dad a
Yeah.
shitload of money, and
Generational wealth is it's a different human.
different human. And I think I don't remember where I heard this, but I think typically it's the third generation that throws all the money away. Like grandpa made it, right? Dad, he was, semi responsible with it. He didn't waste it. And then Junior, like the Hunter Biden kid, he loses it all, right? Just completely throws it away. And that's not true of everybody, but yeah, to your point, I think generational wealth is very different than earned money. And
Yeah.
Jim, the other thing that's kind of analogous to that is, and I've done a lot of coaching, and you've done a lot of coaching, and you've dealt with a lot of people that work for other companies, big companies, that have big budgets and responsibility for hundreds of employees, and they can sign off on things. They don't have to go get the CFO's signature on things if it's less than a $10 million or whatever. A lot of those people think they're entrepreneurs,
Hmm.
and they're not, because they're
Yeah.
not playing with their
It's
own
not their
money.
money. Yeah.
It's not their money. That's a completely different way of looking at the world, man.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do. And in fact, I'm glad you brought it up because let's go back to our framework, right? I'm staring at our wheel, and we 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 always start off with the main category. In this case, there's five of them, right? Worldview, health, profession, people, and then money. Next week we'll do people. And in money, we have two subcategories, and that's abundance and scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
And when the subcategories of abundance is uh, typically they're triggers, right? When money comes up, there's you're one. I think you're either or. You can work on yourself maybe to be less than, but there's a trigger that goes off when a dollar sign comes up, and it's either abundance or scarcity. And within abundance, it's either going to be optimistic. I'll just make more. It's abundant. I don't worry about it. It's the opposite of scarcity. And then other one is charity. Maybe you're more generous with it because you feel like more will come. And when we talk about scarcity, those triggers it's typically fear based, and it's you're a pessimist.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Mm-hmm.
It's the rainy day syndrome, right?
Yeah.
You're
No,
saving
it's
for a rainy day, and it's pretty soon, all you've done is sacrifice for rainy days, and you've almost even given up your quality of your life because you're so obsessed with this. And I also want to share something with you, especially as I'm watching our parents age.
mm-hmm.
And again, I'm trying not to get too revealing in terms of my life or other people's life, but it's kind of sad to see somebody in. I would have put my dad in this category to some degree, but it was more the dynamics between my mother and father. They were constantly worried about money because of the time they grew up. Right, they were born during the Depression,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's part of their DNA,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and they were saved, but in the end, they were always managing their money, and then when my dad passed away, my brother and I started looking into the accounts because my mom didn't do any. That was not uncommon at that time, right? He did all the bills, he did
Mine
everything,
too. Same thing. My dad brought the money home, and
right?
he managed it. And my mom, you could tell she didn't know what was going on, because when they got divorced, she didn't know what to do,
Yeah,
and she wasn't good at asking for help either. But yeah,
right.
go
Yeah, let me just finish
finish
the
your
story
story.
because
Yep.
it's interesting because you'll see kind of how this thing plays out, right? Uh, we also in our home, he was very, very vocal about you just never talk about money. You
Mm-hmm.
never talk about money. It's taboo. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, anybody talked about money was seen, as lower, and it wasn't a judgment. It was just like the guy had, why would you go up and start talking about your salary, right? You're really, it's what you're doing is you're displaying your self-worth to the world on some stupid number you made up, and particularly if somebody's trying to brag about how much money they made. That's even worse than somebody just talking about that. And so I remember that you just never talked about money.
That's in your DNA for life, man. That's
It
in your
is. It
DNA for
is. And
life.
it's
Yeah.
true. Really, what good comes from it? If you think about this, what good comes from talking about how much money you made?
Nothing.
Nothing. Only judgment. Yeah.
It's an inauthentic way to begin a conversation. It's fake. And a
Yeah.
couple other things yeah, I mean, we didn't have the same taboo, but I guarantee you, if I was overheard by my father asking someone else how much money they made, that I'd be grabbed by the nape of the neck and dragged into the other room.
Yeah.
That's like that's
But where I was going with the story was, so then when after his passing, we started to start open up on these accounts and realized, wow, there's 500,000 here, there's 200,000. He had spread his money out in like 5 different banks.
hmm,
And once we had the death certificate, these different banks, you could go to the bank and say, hey,
yep.
how much is there? And in one day, my brother, I think, found, close to $500,000 just spread out on all these bunks. Because you know what? It made complete sense at that time, because remember, the banks were only insured for a certain amount of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
What he was doing was the right thing to do. He was diversifying his money,
Mhm,
and he was
mhm.
putting it in different banks in case one. It wasn't as crazy as it sounds, right?
So it sounds smart. It
It's
sounds
very
smart.
he was
It's
very smart. Yeah.
he was yeah.
The other thing he did is he took a relatively early retirement and then started managing his own money, playing the stock market, and
Mhm,
went all in on Tesla and Apple and all these other stocks, and again racked up a couple $1 million
yeah.
of net worth and
Mhm,
didn't tell anybody.
yeah.
So the nature of that relationship is every time he come home with 2 bolts and a block of wood in a Home Depot bag, my mom just chew his head off, right? Like, you're spending too much money, Johnny. You're spending too much money. So that was just, that's part of, you're always conscious of spending money, and it's I probably benefited it more than not, but
Probably. I
uh,
think the my take on that is when I lost it all, I had to rebuild my outlook on about money. I had to rebuild it because I grew up with definitely a scarcity mindset that I got from my parents. And I don't even say that negatively. There's one thing, it's like the difference between being cheap and being frugal, you know? Like
yes,
I think so many, did you ever have a friend that you don't have as a friend anymore, that every time you go out and there's a round of beers, and every time it's his turn to pay, he's in the men's room, you know? I had a friend like that. And then the other thing that pops into my head is when you go out to dinner with other couples. If you're with couples, I think it's fine, because that can be a burdensome tab if there's 4 or 5 couples, that to be not, and maybe all of them can afford to pay it, but
yeah,
it's still a little bit much to ask. When you go out with guys, or especially if I'm going out with just a friend of mine, I never keep track. I always offer to pay first, or most of the time, if I'm conscious of it, and I'll accept no after the second or third no, because then you're rude. Go, you want to pay? That's fine. I offered. You would prefer to pay? That's great.
yeah.
Who paid last time? I don't remember. Okay. You put 5 women down at
It
a
just goes to
table.
show how different our minds work, right? Because in my mind, I'm a cheap bastard. I think in fact, a couple of years ago, a guy kept referring. He kept saying, "I'm cheap, I'm cheap," and I was like, "Good guy." And I said, what are you talking?" He goes, "No, so I started doing it. And it's kind of funny because it's true. Like, you just know you're cheap. You disclose it in advance because the meter never stops. Like, and it's funny because it goes back to, like, 15, 16 years old, when we used to go cut school and buy beer. Everybody, we didn't have that much money. So everybody was doing the math on
Yeah. Well,
who paid for the
circumstances
beer and
aside,
so on and so on. So that meter just never stops. I know
for
exactly every cent that's being calculated, no matter what I'm doing. And
yeah.
I'm not bragging at all.
Yeah.
And fun
No, no,
sometimes,
no.
to your point,
But I,
it,
I've known you for a number of years now, and we've gone out. to have drinks and have food more than one occasion. I never got any sense that you were cheap at all. Like
Oh, no,
my
no, no. I'm aware of it now, but I'm just saying that that doesn't mean you were saying you don't keep track of it. I
yeah,
keep track of everything all the
yeah,
time
yeah. No,
because
that's
yeah,
interesting. That is
I got to
interesting.
tell this funny story, and I can't believe I'm going to say, it, especially with what's going on in the world. But honest to God, truth, and it just keep in mind. So if anybody happens to hear this or decides to edit it, I was 15 years old, right, 16 years old, and we put our money together and we go buy beer,
Hmm.
and over time it was the same group of guys, and the guy that would try to get out of it, one guy started also calling him uh, a Jew, and I didn't know that. Honest to God, we
Yeah.
did. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. There wasn't a lot of Jews, and if there was, we didn't know they were Jewish, right?
Yes. Yes.
But I didn't realize it was it was a group of people and a religion and a religious religion and all these other things. So up until I think I was probably 18 years old, I thought the word Jew meant was a guy that didn't buy beer.
Yeah.
Honest to God. Because one of the guys, he must have learned it from at home or from his dad or
Well,
something, and he
back
started
to
accusing us
yeah,
of
yeah,
being
yeah.
a
Back
Jew. And I honest to God, I didn't know what that was. But it just goes to show you, how you don't know what you don't know. And but
well,
but
it's also it's a stereotype, right? We used to be able to
I
say
didn't
it.
even know that, Mark. That's what I'm saying. So
I
I would
understand.
use
Yeah,
that. I just
I
thought it was a guy
understand.
that didn't buy beer.
Generally speaking, it's a That's funny. I mean, that's funny. But I want to switch back and finish my thought about. I was just ready to move on to like the how men look at money. Not all men, but
Mhm.
generally speaking,
Yeah.
versus how women look at money.
Oh.
And that was a 2 or 3 year period of time when I waited tables and bartended back in the day.
Oh, that's
And
right.
man,
Yeah.
you see 5 women sit down at a table, and you're just like, I don't want to touch that table, man. They're gonna penny pinch the tip. They're gonna split the tab 5 ways, and
Yes.
one of them's gonna argue with some other one about you only ate half your salad, or I got a water and you got a glass
Yeah.
of wine. I'm like, Jesus, just you guys figure it out. I'll get back to you in like 45 minutes. I got other shit I got to do. You know.
But you're right. The women are very, very let's just say uh detailed about money, especially when it's not flowing in their direction, right?
It's just I couldn't break that down psychologically. I'm not a psychologist. I just find it interesting that
Yeah.
none of these things are always the case. But many of them are the
Yeah.
case most of the time. They're
Yeah. Yeah, we're
generalities.
generalizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Luckily my wife's not like that at all. And so she wouldn't fall in that category. But that's funny. You're right. It's true. They're also the best bookkeepers because they track every cent, right?
yeah,
I'm
that's
generalizing, but you want somebody around you. I'm saying this in a very positive. You need to have those kind of people around you if you're running a business or you're running a household. So
yeah,
but,
yeah.
but I do think it can go too far. And here's something I wanted to mention too about this goes back to childhood and how money is used, especially in families or people. I think men do this to women too, and this is very sad where they use money as power. They use money to manipulate somebody or even abuse somebody
Hmm.
by how much they release or don't release.
Yep.
And that can be really damaging later on in life at any stage, whether it happened in their childhood and they bring that into the adulthood. And
It's
then as
interesting. That's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, my ex is didn't have the ability to express real love because she wasn't loved growing up. No one taught
Mm,
her how to do that. And this wasn't discovered by me obviously for some time, but she used to do that. She used to throw money and gifts, material things at people to make up for the fact that she couldn't hug them or express love or say I love you or any of those things that are truly, and it's very manipulative. And I watch my children now live a life that where they saw that all the time. Like
mm,
daddy's coming at us with a hug, and mom's coming at us with a new bike. Like
mm,
what's going on here? It's really
mhm.
really weird. And to your point, it can be very damaging. It can be very
Yeah, I think it
painful.
happens a lot. And like you said, in families that split up because one parent could be trying to buy off the other one by
That's
giving them
exactly what
things.
happened. That's
And it
exactly
just,
what happened.
it mind fucks the poor kid
Yeah,
sometimes too,
it
right? They
does.
don't know which way to turn and that. So nothing I wanted before we wrap it up is talk about how money is related to these other areas in our life. And that's, let's start off with health, right? There is no question that if you have a lot of money problems, it's going to affect your physical and mental health.
Hmm.
In fact, I would go as far as saying that's probably the number one contributor of our health, our mental health, and even our physical health. Right?
Well,
If your money isn't right, it's going to affect your health.
I recall, and it's not. I'm not through it. I'm made some wonderful progress, and I'm very happy with where I am, and more even so about where I'm going monetarily. But yeah, and there were many years. I mean, my assets were frozen for a couple of years. Like I
Mhm.
didn't. I was buying groceries with credit cards. You know,
Wow.
so I've been in that situation where I have no idea how I'm going to pay for tomorrow,
Yeah.
and that went on for a long time. But the other thing I did, and I guess I did it with purpose, and I thank my parents for giving me the gift of being able to do it, is I said, what can I replace the money with while I'm waiting on the reaccumulation of money? And I'm like, okay, God, exercise,
Mhm.
um, hanging around with good people,
Yep.
um,
Mental.
being productive,
Yep.
right? Breath work, meditation. So there's a litany of things, and I guess this all circles back to self awareness, right? You have the ability, if you are self aware, to go,
Yep.
that's a negative emotion, and I didn't do anything to cause that, so I'm not going to take responsibility for it. But I need to make an adjustment because I'm too worried about, I'm too anxious about this, I'm too angry or sad about this,
Yeah.
and I don't like those, so I'm going to go find a replacement for that.
Yeah. Something you said is really interesting. I never thought about this, but it's true. There's certain friends, you're talking about our mental health, but there's certain friends, this falls into the worldview, right? That you're, or actually say the category of others, people, men and women. But yeah, there are certain friends that I no longer associate with because I realized it wasn't healthy. That the way the whole conversation somehow became about money, whether it was them talking about their money or me not feeling good about whatever it was
Mm.
uncomfortable and probably subconsciously disassociated myself with them because it does affect relationships. If
Yeah,
it,
yeah. I
yeah,
think that cheap is. It's, I mean, you're kind of teasing yourself about being cheap, but I mean, true cheapness
yeah.
is distasteful.
Or
It's
somebody that is obsessed by money and that all their entire lens of self-worth or other people's worth is
mhm.
based on how much money they have or the things they have.
Yeah,
That's an exhausting person to be around. Like that, there's
yeah.
never enough. And
I can think of a couple guys that aren't in my life anymore. But there were Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and how many cars do you need? I remember hearing
you're right. At a certain point, you're just like, dude,
that's
lighten
like
up. Who are you trying to prove it to, right?
yeah,
Especially
yeah.
at this stage, it is what it is. Get on with it. And
They're
yeah,
also eating the erectile dysfunction pills and wearing the wigs.
of course, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
remember, I remember, I can't remember if it was Shaq or Charles Barkley. I think it was Charles Barkley, but either I like both those guys, and they both obviously came into a lot of money,
yep.
having grown up with none. And it
Mhm.
was somebody like Julius Irving. It was an elder statesman in the NBA said something to Barkley's like, "How many cars do you have?" He goes, six. He goes, why do you need more than two? And they began
Yeah.
talking about the difference between rich and wealthy,
Mm.
right? And
Yep.
you're gonna spend half of your life not making this money anymore. So
Yeah.
you better use it wisely now. And it's like both of these guys. I think somebody said it to both of them, and they were talking about how it changed their life, right?
Mhm.
It just a light bulb went off. I found
I'm
it very
definitely in
interesting.
that place. Less is more. And I think you hit different stages in your life. I'm right now, I've got a group of friends, and these guys all have, they're in a good spot financially, houses, multiple cars, and so on. And we're like, I don't know if I want another house. I don't know if I want another car.
Mm,
I want less stuff, less things to worry about. It's not cool who are we trying to impress? I do think you hit a certain stage in your life, like, nobody really cares that much. So what are you trying to impress? So
Well,
I
it's interesting, and I can conclude my portion with this, but I've had, I'll just use one of my children as an example. Not that it does or doesn't apply to all three of them, but my middle daughter, when she experienced her first financial leap, let's call it six figures of income on her own and running her own business,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden, you don't see this coming. I don't think any of us see it coming until it comes the first time. And then if it comes again, you should be prepared for it. But all of a sudden, I need an accountant, I need an attorney, I need to hire an assistant, and I'm wrestling with Uncle Sam. I'm getting all kinds of documents from the IRS, and I don't know what any of them mean. And what do I do about this? And then I got payroll over here, and it's like, and fortunately for her, I had gone through all that. So
Yeah, fortunately for her. Yeah.
we just took them one at a
Yeah.
time. But with money comes more responsibility,
Right.
and
But being an entrepreneur, you could help her with that.
yeah,
Like in my case, my mother and father, they had no understanding of
nor did
entrepreneurship.
mine. They thought I was crazy for starting my own business. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's a whole that's how money impacts the whole difference in profession between being an entrepreneur and working for somebody else,
Yeah.
which is a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It does remind me. I remember when I first came into my first, well, I think I told you I was in a car accident. So I went through a windshield and I got a settlement for, it was like $10,000. Wasn't that much money, but at the time, I was only 20 years old, 21 years old when I got the settlement. And so I remember going from the lawyer's office to the um to the realtor's office to drop off the check because I bought my first house. It
yeah,
was
yeah, it's a good story. It's a
and it
good
was
story.
just because I knew it, if I didn't spend that money on put it on something, it wouldn't. So it's also not what you make, it's how you manage it.
That's an
It-
interesting. I'd be curious, and maybe not to put words in your mouth, but do you think, because that's a wise move for a 21-year-old kid.
Mhm.
That's wisdom at a young age.
Yeah.
You attribute that to the way your parents thought about money?
I think I contributed to just the fact that yeah, my mom and they owned a home, so that was because they owned homes. You realize how important that was, and also it was it had a cabinet shop in the back. I remember this house had, not only could I buy the house and not have to pay rent anymore, it had this big garage in the back where I can make cabinets. So I knew
Uh,
I could not just, I'd make the house payment barely. It was 10% interest, right? It was back in that day. It was, I remember, because it was $100,000 house. I put $10,000 down, 10% down, and my payment was about $1,000 a month.
yeah, yeah,
But I could go on the weekends. I was selling cabinets during the day, but on the weekends I would make cabinets in the back. So
nice. So that
I
fulfilled a few different purposes for you.
well,
That's
and it
cool.
also goes to show you that I had multiple streams of income, right? Not to
Mhm.
be dependent on one stream of income. I like the ability to control. And both of us were in sales. So when we talk about, I'm looking at our different areas, right? But profession, if you've, both of us, you eat what you kill, right? It's a commission based business. That's everything. Your worth every month was based on how many sales you brought in
Oh
to the
yeah, no,
company. And then you
just saying.
realize,
Yeah,
especially as time goes on, that whole company depended on you. If you don't bring in the sales, nobody has a job. And
yeah.
that's
That's I think of all the, and we can wrap up, but I think of all the people that I've talked to about money, given the fact that I was a recruiter for my whole life and or the owner operator of a company with employees. So I've had millions or thousands of conversations about money, and everybody feels a little bit differently about it. Some
yeah.
people are driven by it, some people don't care about it at all,
Mhm.
but it is a big part of who you are, whether you're
Oh
aware of it
boy,
or
is it.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I again I we always say this, every one of these areas is the most important area, but we threw the money one in when we were doing this and we started this.
Yeah.
And it really gets people thinking about what's going on in their life when they're again, it's about self-awareness and then self-control of processing that. It just it's allows you to be your best self.
It's funny, Jim, and I'll leave you with this. when you're talking about, we were not allowed to talk about money in my house. And, I don't think my house was that much different. It was just a
Mhm.
different topic. I'm not concerned about what someone's title is or what they do for a living. It's kind of the same thing. But then I end up in a career where every single person I talk to within 5 or 10 minutes of meeting them, I ask them, how much money do you make?
It's kind of fun. That's your job. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
All right,
And then
dude.
and then the other one we left out is worldview. How do you think money plays into your worldview? Like I despise these politicians that just keep spending money year after year and borrowing it. That's just basic arithmetic, right? Like how
Well,
could you
that
borrow
this,
money in
yeah.
debt the younger generation? And then it's the selfishness. I think it's very revealing how people handle the money, about how the selfishness of some humans
Well,
of
on top of that, and I agree with that 100%, those same people are accumulating wealth at our expense,
yeah,
right? They're accumulating wealth with insider
I never
information.
thought of that.
And so it's a double whammy, you know? So fuck them.
Yeah, it's pretty sick if you think
It
about that,
is.
right?
It is. It
And
is. All right. Well,
all
I
right.
think this was a fun conversation. I'm glad we had this topic, and I'll look forward to speaking to you about our next topic next week.
Yeah, which
And
is our last
Merry
of this series,
Christmas.
right? The last topic, and we're going to talk about others, people.
Yep. And then we'll conclude with the seventh one, which will be about agency, which kind of wraps around the whole thing.
Yeah,
All right, Jim. Thanks, man.
thank you.